When Blizzard first introduced the game World of Warcraft in 2004, they did not plan for a lot of things to happen. Because of the massive amount of players that were involved in World of Warcraft, many crazy things were discovered and things happened in the game that Blizzard had no plan of ever happening. Now, this is a list of the craziest things that have ever happened in classic World of Warcraft. This does not include anything from any private servers. This is a list of things that happened in the live Blizzard version of World of Warcraft Classic. So Doomlord Kazzak was a world boss, a world raid boss that required 40 men to beat in Blasted Lands. He was quite a tough boss and had many abilities that made him quite the scary opponent. For one, when he killed an enemy, he actually gained 70,000 HP. As your raid was dying, he would get stronger and stronger and stronger. The boss itself required a lot of coordination and planning and buffing, and basically required a dedicated team to take down. So when there were a few players, a few clever trolls that realized you could actually bring him to a city, all chaos broke loose. In classic World of Warcraft, you could actually take a mob and basically let it attack you. You attack the mob and it will follow you. With Doomlord Kazzak, if you had a dedicated team, you could actually pull it a very, very long distance. Being that Blasted Lands is actually quite close relative to Stormwind, people figured out we could actually bring Doomlord Kazzak into Stormwind. And of course, when you could do something like that, people actually did it. But the journey itself was immense. As I said, you needed an actual group to take Doomlord Kazzak into Stormwind. You would first need to go into the Blasted Lands, then into the Swamp of Sorrows, then Deadwind Pass, then Duskwood, then Elwyn Forest, and finally bring him to Stormwind. Craziness did not stop there. As he was brought into Stormwind, every enemy, an NPC, and player he killed, he gained 70,000 HP. So even if people tried to kill him, it was almost impossible since there was constantly low-level players being killed by Doomlord Kazzak. Considering his ability arsenal, he could rack up kills very easily when he was in Stormwind. He had a Shadow Bolt volley that basically killed everyone in a very, very long distance. The Shadow Bolts he fired was an AoE attack that hit anyone for 800 to 1,000 damage. So any low-level players that were hit by this were killed instantly. On top of this, the Shadow Bolts that he cast couldn't actually be stopped by line of sight. So if you were in a building, you weren't safe from the Shadow Bolts. You would still get hit by the Shadow Bolts from Doomlord Kazzak. So as you can imagine, it was pretty impossible to beat him once he came to the city, because there were constantly NPCs and low-level players that were getting killed by the Shadow Bolts. And every time he killed an enemy, he would gain 70,000 HP. So he was basically invincible. Once he was brought to Stormwind, there was no going back. There was no way to actually kill him. And it got to the point where the GMs of Blizzard actually had to intervene, and they actually took him out of the game. There was no player solution that could actually stop Doomlord Kazzak once he was in Stormwind. Blizzard actually had to intervene, and it's pretty crazy this happened. Number 2 is an ability that Paladins had called Reckoning. And the way Reckoning worked was that every time you were a victim of a critical strike, you would gain the ability to strike another time on your next swing. However, this ability could stack as many times as you want. So people came up with a very clever solution on how to use this ability to actually take down bosses. So if you were dedicated enough, you could actually sit your character down, have your friend attack you, and this would be a guaranteed critical strike. As in classic World of Warcraft, if you were attacked while sitting down, it would be a guaranteed critical strike. So you kept sitting down and your friend kept hitting you, you would gain more and more stacks of Reckoning, to the point where you could get as many stacks as you want and you could actually one-shot anything you wanted. It got to the point where a character actually gained 1,800 plus stacks of Reckoning from his friend critical striking him over and over again. So people had the bright idea to do this, and they actually targeted Doomlord Kazzak once again. They went up to him and one-shotted him with the Reckoning bomb. And this was the only time there's ever been a one-shot of a boss, aside from broken GM items. Immediately after this happened, Blizzard hotfixed the bug. However, it is not known as to whether or not the man that did the Reckoning Bomb actually got banned, because he technically didn't exploit any glitch. This was simply part of the game, and you could actually justify it being a clever use of game mechanics. I mean, just look at this. Number 3, Corrupted Blood. So in a raid called Zul'Gurub, there was the end boss called Hakar the Soulflayer. And Hakar the Soulflayer had a debuff that he casted on the raid members, which was basically a damage over time ability. However, the key piece to this debuff was that it actually spread to people nearby. So if you were in the raid and you got this debuff, if you were standing next to another raid member, he would also get the damage over time debuff. And this did about 200 damage per 3 seconds. So this was quite a nasty debuff to have, and you actually had to spread your members out as to not spread the plague. However, accidentally, a hunter had his pet out and the pet got infected with the plague. He dismissed the pet and he basically just continued and he killed the boss and he got the loot. Everything was fine. He goes back to the city, he summons his pet again, and he realizes, oh wait, my pet actually has the debuff from Hakar the Soulflayer. And immediately everything around him gets infected with the blood plague. So as you can imagine, being in a city like Orgrimmar or Stormwind, having this plague be unleashed upon the middle of the city, NPCs, players, pets, everything would get infected with this plague, and they would spread from each other one by one. The spread of this plague was exponential, and in a very short time, cities like Orgrimmar and Stormwind were uninhabitable by the common players of World of Warcraft. NPCs were dead. The auctioneers were dead. You would step into Orgrimmar and you would get infected. It was an absolute nightmare. It even got to the stage where people were having quarantine camps outside of the major cities where they would dispel the plague from you. So people actually mobilized their own resistance against this plague. And the way people reacted to this incident is very similar to how real life humans would react to a similar situation. When there is a plague that is out of control, people will naturally avoid the major cities and look to find quarantine zones. In fact, this incident has been so documented, it has actually been in scientific journals as to how humans would react in such a situation. If a highly contagious plague was unleashed upon humanity, people would actually look to World of Warcraft Classic as to protocol or how to react to it. That is how crazy this incident was. Number 4. In World of Warcraft, rogues were quite powerful in PvP. In fact, if you had a very specific build, you could actually beat people without wearing any gear at all. Very famous videos, such as World of Warcraft, highlighted this fact, where you see a player kill enemies using the worst weapon in the game and not wearing any gear. In fact, you could actually beat people in the game using the Worn Dagger, which is the worst weapon in the game. And the way this was possible was that the spell Eviscerate was actually a static damage spell, meaning the damage done by Eviscerate did not scale with attack power or any other stats. In fact, Eviscerate was the same from someone wearing no gear to wearing all epic items. The attack damage from Eviscerate was exactly the same. So if you had a very specific PvP build that maximized your cooldowns, you could actually use the Eviscerate spell over and over again while your enemy was stun locked. There's even footage of people killing people that have all epic items, and some of the best PvP players in the game have no chance of defending themselves against a rogue with no gear on. This is how strong this build was. It didn't even require you to wear any gear and could be done with the worst weapon in the game, and you could get results using it. Anchorage 40 is one of the biggest instances in World of Warcraft history. However, AQ40 was a giant raid. In fact, it had so much trash. Going from the start of the instance to the Kafun room took about 30 minutes of clearing trash. It was such a long instance. It was so many raid bosses that to clear it, it's usually a 2-nighter. Very rarely could you beat AQ40 in one night. However, a US guild discovered a very tricky way of skipping all the trash and going straight to Kafun. And when Naxxramas was released, the only relevant boss that dropped any loot that was usable in Naxxramas was Kafun. So people racked their brains as to how to get to Kafun without beating any of the previous bosses or any of the previous trash. But the US Guild came up with a way of deleting game files in the World of Warcraft folder that allowed you to go underneath the platform where the first boss is and go straight into the Kafun room. This saved you plenty of time, and you did not need to spend hours upon hours killing bosses that you had no need of getting loot from. You could go straight to Kafun with very little effort. But the way it worked is that altering game files, you could actually remove the panel that is near the first boss and go straight down into the Kafun room. By doing this, you saved a ton of time. However, Blizzard discovered this and realized, wait a second, these people's raid IDs doesn't make a lot of sense. They are saved to only kill Kafun, but they haven't killed any of the previous bosses. So Blizzard was pretty suspicious, and upon discovering this exploit, Blizzard banned everyone involved permanently. Anyone that had a raid ID that only had Kafun killed was banned permanently. So that was some of the craziest things that have ever happened in classic World of Warcraft. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you like it, please like down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. This is vaulty signing out.